The Pend Oreille River is a tributary of the Columbia River, approximately 130 miles long, in northern Idaho and northeastern Washington in the United States, as well as southeastern British Columbia in Canada. In its passage through British Columbia, its name is spelled Pend-d'Oreille River. It drains a scenic area of the Rocky Mountains along the U.S. Canada border on the east side of the Columbia. The river is sometimes defined as the lower part of the Clark Fork, which rises in western Montana. The river drains an area of 66,800 square kilometers, mostly through the Clark Fork and its tributaries in western Montana and including a portion of the Flathead River in southeastern British Columbia. The full drainage basin of the river and its tributaries accounts for 43% of the entire Columbia River basin above the confluence with the Columbia. The total area of the Pend Oreille Basin is just under 10% of the entire 258,000 square mile Columbia Basin course. The Pend Oreille River begins at Lake Pend Oreille in Bonner County, Idaho in the Idaho Panhandle, draining the lake from its western end near Sandpoint. It flows west receiving the Priest River from the north at the town of Priest River, then flows into southern Pend Oreille County in northeastern Washington at Newport. Once in Washington it turns north, flowing along the eastern side of the Selkirk Mountains. It flows roughly parallel to the Idaho border for approximately 50 miles, through the Colville National Forest, past Tiger and Metaline Falls. It crosses the international border into southeastern British Columbia, looping west for about 15 miles and joining the Columbia from the east, approximately 0.2 miles north of the international border and approximately 5 miles south of Montrose watershed, spreading across 25,792 square miles. The Pend Oreille River watershed stretches across most of western Montana, northern Idaho and northeastern Washington, as well as tiny portions in southern British Columbia drained by the North Fork Flathead River and the lower Pend Oreille River. Much of the southern drainage divide of the watershed forms the border of Idaho and Montana, and a very short portion of the northeastern divide forms the border of British Columbia and Alberta. The river is sometimes considered as one with the Clark Fork, which is the primary river flowing into Lake Pend Oreille. For example, in Stuart Holbrook's book, The Columbia, he repeatedly refers to the Pend Oreille River as the Clark Fork. If the lengths of the North Fork Flathead, Main Flathead, Clark Fork and Pend Oreille are added together, the total is over 510 miles stretching from the Rocky Mountains north of Glacier National Park to the Canada-U.S. border south of Montrose, British Columbia. This makes the Pend Oreille system the second longest tributary of the Columbia River. It is the fourth largest by discharge and drains the second largest area. The Pend Oreille River watershed divide is formed on the east side by the Continental Divide. On the south, the Spokane River and Snake River drainage basins border on the Clark Fork. To the west, smaller rivers such as the Colville River and tributaries of the Spokane drain the lands past the watershed divide. In the north is the Kootenai River, a similar-sized tributary of the Columbia. To the east, in Montana, is the Missouri River and tributaries such as the Marias River and Milk River. In the southwest, the watershed borders on the Big Hole River and Jefferson River, headwater streams of the Missouri. The Pend Oreille Clark Fork system is notable in that it cuts right between the Bitterroot Range and Selkirk Range, two major chains of the Rocky Mountains. The only other river to do so is the Kootenai, just to the north. The Rocky Mountain Trench runs across the northeast part of the watershed, through the Flathead Valley, and eventually terminating in mountains near the Clark Fork's confluence with the Flathead. Tributaries The Pend Oreille River starts in northern Idaho at Lake Pend Oreille, Idaho's largest lake. Coconally Creek is the first major tributary. The next one is the Priest River. This is 68 miles long, and has 3 rivers flowing into it. Sullivan Creek is the last big tributary. The Clark Fork is also considered a tributary, as is the Pack. Geology. Much of the Pend Oreille Valley consists of relatively ancient metamorphic rock, uplifted over 500 million years ago from the former floor of the Precambrian sea that covered the region during that period. Granite batholiths overlain by layers of sedimentary rock compose most of the higher terrain, such as the Cabinet Mountains. The age of the rocks along the Pend Oreille generally decreases as one travels downstream, and the terrain is also more rugged towards the north than in the south. About 200 million years ago, increased tectonic activity caused the uplift of the Idaho batholith, a portion of which cooled and eroded to become the present main body of the Bitterroot Range, a major physiographic feature of the watershed which sweeps from northwest to southeast along the entire Clark Fork Valley. By about 70 million years ago, this time period is generally accepted as when the entire Rocky Mountains system was formed, although age of the rocks varies with location. In the previous ice age, a massive glacier of the Cordilleran ice sheet advanced southwards through the Idaho Panhandle, burying the Lake Pend Oreille and Upper Pend Oreille River Valley with ice hundreds to thousands of feet thick. This formed a pair of ice dams, one gigantic and one significantly smaller, the one that caused the water of the Clark Fork and other smaller streams to back up into glacial Lake Missoula, which stretched over 200 miles southwest across western Montana, containing some 500 cubic miles of water, was over 2,000 feet high. The second one blocked the Upper Pend Oreille River near Sandpoint, creating an enlarged Lake Pend Oreille that could have connected with a similarly enlarged Kootenay Lake in the north. Water pressure and glacial melt destroyed the larger of the two ice dams several times, causing massive amounts of water to rush out across eastern Washington through the Upper Pend Oreille River. My mistaken belief is that these cataclysmic floods, known as the Missoula floods, traveled down the Pend Oreille Valley into the Columbia. Rather, it is now thought that the water completely breached the western divide of the Pend Oreille River Valley and rushed out towards the direction of Spokane. History. Native people who lived along the river included the Pend Oreille and Kalispel. Archaeological evidence suggests that people lived in the region as early as the end of the last ice age, about 11,000–12,000 years ago. The name Pend Oreille is variously stated to mean earring, hang from ears, or shape of an ear. Kalispel is thought to mean Camas people, referring to the roots that provided the primary food. Both tribes lived around the area of Lake Pend Oreille, occasionally ranging lower onto the Pend Oreille River, but the lower basin was generally less populated than the upper portion. The Flathead tribe inhabited the upper part of the basin, especially the Bitterroot Valley. The Katanaksa lived just to the east of the Pend Oreille River. The first non-indigenous people to see the Pend Oreille were French-Canadian fur trappers working for various fur trading companies to provide beaver pelts to trade overseas. Some of these people were the ones to coin the term Pend d'Oreille. Canadian explorer David Thompson saw the river in 1807, after a long and arduous journey from Saskatchewan. His primary mission was to find the source of the Columbia River, which he did. Afterwards he proceeded to establish trading posts throughout the region, including Kalispel House on the north shore of Lake Pend Oreille. In 1808, Thompson again traveled into the Pend Oreille region. The following spring, he tried to reach the Columbia River by way of the Pend Oreille, but rapids and waterfalls hampered his attempt. He ended up retreating to another trading post in British Columbia a few months later. After these early explorations, however, there still were no permanent wide settlements along the Pend Oreille River. By the 1840s, Europeans and Americans were pouring into the region in increasing numbers, although growth was slow. These newcomers did not strike good relations with the Native Americans of the area, and diseases such as smallpox wiped out many indigenous. After numerous wars and treaties, much of the land in the Pend Oreille Basin, especially the Upper Clark Fork area, had been ceded to the settlers. The last land in the Bitterroot area was given up in 1889, and many tribes of the Pend Oreille Basin were moved to reservations in northwestern Montana. In the late 1850s, a major influx of non-indigenous peoples occurred when gold was discovered near Metaline Falls on the Pend Oreille River. The first major white settlements in that area, however, were not created until 1884. Mining for gold soon ceased, but lead and zinc mining continued, reaching a peak in World War II when the metals were desperately needed for the productions of weapons, ships, planes. In the 19th century, logging was the other major industry of the Pend Oreille River area, and attracted hundreds to thousands of men to the region, many of them Scandinavian. Logging was profitable because almost the entire Pend Oreille watershed was forested with various types of trees. However, shipping logs to ports lower on the Columbia River was a problem. Not only was the river riddled with frightening waterfalls and rapids, but it flows north, in the opposite direction that the logging companies wanted to move the logs. At about this time, steamboats were introduced to the Pend Oreille River. The first steamboat on the river was the Bertha, built in 1887 at Albany Falls. Other well-known craft included Ione, Spokane, and Metaline. These boats carried passengers and ore and also towed log rafts up the river. Navigation on the Pend Oreille presented few problems upstream of the Box Canyon Rapids, about 3/4 of the way down the Pend Oreille River. Many boats were wrecked in the stretch between Box Canyon and the river's mouth. After the Idaho and Amp, Washington Northern Railroad was built in the area, steamboat commerce faded and the logs were transported by rail. The Idaho and Amp, Washington Northern was eventually succeeded by the Milwaukee Road. The Pend Oreille River Valley was never easy for early or later immigrants to settle in. The little arable land that did exist was mostly within the river's floodplain, and in many places there was only a narrow strip of flat ground that would soon run against vertical cliffs or dense forests with rocky soil. Nevertheless, some permanent settlements persisted at Newport, Albany Falls, Ione, Dalkina, Metaline Falls, Cusick, Usk, and many at the sites of the sawmills that cut the lumber extracted from the region. Some emigrants also settled along the Clark Fork, but there were similar problems because for most of its course, the Clark Fork, like the Pend Oreille, flows in a steep and narrow gorge. Larger amounts of people settled in the Flathead River Valley, around Flathead Lake and Lake Pend Oreille, in the Priest River Valley, and in the Bitterroot Valley of southwestern Montana. Sand Point, near where the river flows out of Lake Pend Oreille, remains the largest city in close proximity to the river. River modifications. There are 5 hydroelectric dams on the Pend Oreille River, 1 and 7 Mile dams in Canada, Boundary, Box Canyon, and Albany Falls dams in the United States. The combined generating capacity of all the dams is approximately 2,480 megawatts. Boundary Dam has the largest generating capacity of the 5 at 1,070 megawatts. The smaller Albany Falls Dam regulates the level of Lake Pend Oreille to provide some flood control during the summer and increased flows during dry winters. None of the dams provide for fish passage and navigation. Numerous dams upstream along the Clark Fork and Flathead also generate power and to a lesser extent regulate the inflows to Lake Pend Oreille and the Pend Oreille River. In the 1920s, there was a proposal to divert the Pend Oreille through a 60 miles gravity canal to irrigate the Grand Coulee and surrounding lands in eastern Washington as part of the tentative Columbia Basin project. These plans were later dropped with the construction of Grand Coulee Dam and a pumping plant on the Columbia River. Variant names, according to the USGS, include Bitterroot River, Clark Fork, Clarks Fork, Deer Lodge River, Hellgate River, Missoula River, Pend Oreille River, Silver Bow River, Clarks Fork, and Pend Oreille River. Conservation. Pend Oreille Basin Commission formed to oversee any issues relating to water quality and/or water quantity in Lake Pend Oreille, Pend Oreille River, Priest Lake and Priest River Basin.